George Taylor was used to the calm and quiet that came with living in a small town like Oakwood, deep in the heart of Texas. There, he built a small chain of grocery stores through hard work, earning the trust of the locals with his honesty and a gentle smile. At 78, George had experienced life in all its colors. He'd lost his wife, Elizabeth, just over a year ago, and her absence was felt in every corner of his simple, cozy home. Every memory of her brought both a pang of longing and a strength that kept him moving forward. Elizabeth had always told him that he should live near Michael, their only son, who was making a life for himself in Houston. Michael managed a major luxury car dealership, a position he took great pride in, even though it kept him far from the simple roots and life lessons his father held dear. Missing his son and ready for a new beginning, George made an important decision. He would leave Oakwood and move to Houston to be closer to Michael. Arriving in the big city, the change hit him at every moment. Houston was intense, modern, and people moved at a pace that George could barely keep up with. Determined to embrace this new phase with courage, he decided to do something he'd never imagined: buy a new car. After all, he wanted the independence to get around, perhaps visit new places, and enjoy the years he still had left with freedom. Without telling his son about his decision, he decided to make it a surprise. He took down the address of the dealership where Michael worked and the next day put on his simple button-up shirt, his old felt hat, and set off. As he entered the showroom, he was immediately surrounded by the brightness and sophistication of the place. Luxury cars were on display under carefully placed lights, reflecting all the elegance and status a vehicle could represent. George walked slowly, his eyes sparkling with curiosity, but also with a bit of shyness as he took in such a grand setting. He soon noticed he was being observed by the sales staff, but not in the way he'd imagined. The looks he received carried a mix of condescension and disdain. Between whispers and sidelong glances, George realized some of the employees were chuckling softly, not even bothering to hide their lack of respect. This place seemed far removed from any warmth. The respect he so deeply valued was like a rare currency here. What George didn't know was that one of the people responsible for these comments and laughter was Jack Miller, the dealership's most confident and ambitious salesman. Jack was known for his fierce competitiveness and knack for selling cars to clients seeking status. Looking at George with his humble clothes and modest manner, Jack let out a stifled laugh. "Looks like we've got ourselves a tourist," he muttered to one of his colleagues, who also laughed discreetly. Jack approached him with a smile that bordered on mockery and asked, in a voice that barely hid his disdain, "Can I help you, sir?" George, unaware of the malice, smiled politely and explained that he was interested in buying a car. The salesman raised an eyebrow, masking his incredulity. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" he asked, his tone sounding more like a provocation than a genuine question. George kept calm and responded patiently, saying that yes, he was sure. Even so, Jack continued to treat him dismissively, pretending to look for something within George's budget. Meanwhile, Michael, who was in one of the back offices of the dealership, caught sight of his father through a glass window. At first, he felt immense joy at seeing George, but then hesitation took over. He knew Jack wouldn't give his father the respect he deserved, yet stepping in might create tension with his colleagues and risk his reputation in the company. As time went by and George waited for actual assistance, the humiliation became more painful. Nobody considered him worthy of attention. To them, he was just a curious old man, someone who could never afford one of the cars there. With each passing minute, the feeling of frustration grew in George's heart. He remembered Elizabeth's words about always treating everyone with dignity, and he couldn't understand how people could act in such an inhumane way. After more than an hour of waiting, George stood up, looked around one last time, still hoping someone would offer him dignified service, and seeing that there would be no response other than looks of disdain, decided to leave. His expression, which had once held a glimmer of hope, now reflected sadness and disillusionment. The smile that had so charmed the people of Oakwood had faded, replaced by a bitterness he rarely showed. Leaving the dealership, George walked slowly back home. When he arrived, he felt a heaviness in his chest. He knew he couldn't let that humiliation go unanswered. After all, his goal wasn't revenge, but justice. Something had to be done to teach these people a lesson about respect and humility, something they wouldn't soon forget. The next day, George called his friend and attorney, David Smith. David had known him for decades and always thought of him as a man of integrity and dignity. Listening to George's account of what had happened at the dealership, David was silent for a few moments, before suggesting a bold idea. It was something George had never imagined doing, but as the plan took shape, a determined glint returned to his eyes. He knew this was the right move. "George," David began over the phone, his voice serious and steady, "maybe it's time to teach those people a lesson in respect. They need to understand that dignity isn't something you measure by someone's appearance." George was silent for a moment, absorbing his friend's words. The idea David had just proposed was unexpected, yet it felt increasingly like the right path. "So, you're suggesting I buy the dealership, David?" he asked, sensing that this was indeed the decision he needed to make. "Yes, George, you have the resources, and more than that, you have a life story that can transform that place. Buy the dealership and make it clear that respect is non-negotiable." Determined, George set the process in motion. Over the following days, with David's help, he took care of all the paperwork and negotiations to acquire the dealership. The business was facing financial troubles, so his offer was quickly accepted. George was now the official owner of the dealership, where he had once been disrespected, though few knew of the change. On the morning of his first day as owner, George put on his usual simple shirt and hat, the same ones he'd worn when he last visited the store. He wanted his humble appearance to serve as a reminder that looks can be deceiving and that true wealth lies in how one treats others. As he entered the dealership, curious glances followed him. One of the salespeople, recognizing him, looked uneasy. He knew George wasn't just any customer, but he had no idea what was about to happen. Without wasting time, George asked the manager to gather the entire sales team for a quick meeting. The salespeople, including Jack, came over, many of them whispering to one another, puzzled by the return of this humble-looking man. After a few moments of anticipation, George stepped forward and took a deep breath before he spoke, his voice calm but carrying a silent authority. "Good morning, everyone," he began, looking each employee in the eye. "Some of you may remember me. I was here a few days ago looking for a car, but I didn't receive the respect any customer deserves. And yet, I decided to come back, not as a customer, but as the new owner of this dealership." The shock was immediate. Expressions of surprise quickly turned to disbelief. Jack especially seemed stunned. He stared at George, trying to process the reality that the man he had dismissed and laughed at was now the new owner of the business. George held their gazes steadily before continuing. "I built my life with honesty and respect for others. When I came here the first time, I expected the same in return. But what I got was disregard and contempt. I was judged by my appearance and dismissed as if I had no value." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I hold respect and dignity above all else, and I expect this environment to reflect those values. As the new owner, I want it to be clear that no one here will be treated as I was." Then, he looked directly at Jack and some of the other salespeople who had laughed and whispered among themselves while he waited. "Unfortunately, some of you failed to show the respect that any person deserves, whether they're a customer, a colleague, or simply another human being. And for that, you need to face the consequences of your actions." Jack swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words. He began to stammer an excuse, but George raised his hand, cutting him off. "Jack," George said, his voice now cold and decisive, "the way you treated me was unacceptable. I came expecting fair service, and you decided I wasn't worth your time. You were rude, dismissive, and incapable of seeing the value in a person. For that, you're fired." Jack tried to protest, but George remained firm. He wasn't a man given to harsh words, but he knew these actions couldn't go ignored. "If you can't treat a customer with dignity, you can't be part of this team. You're dismissed." He then turned to other salespeople who had also shown indifference and disdain during his initial visit. "Each of you who laughed at me or turned away when I asked for help, all of you will be let go. A respect is fundamental, and anyone who can't practice it here doesn't deserve a place in this establishment." The tension in the room was palpable. Some salespeople lowered their heads in shame, while others expressed their guilt in silence, aware that their behavior had crossed acceptable boundaries. George continued, now addressing those who would remain on the team. "Those who stay will have a new opportunity to show they know how to treat people with respect. I expect that from now on, all of you will think before judging someone by their appearance. And every customer who walks through those doors should be treated with the same respect regardless of who they are." Some employees nodded, relieved to still have a chance, while those who were dismissed left the room in silence, reflecting on the lesson this moment represented. Jack, humiliated and regretful, was the last to leave, not daring to look at George. As soon as the room emptied, George felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It hadn't been easy to make that decision, but he knew it was the right thing to do. He looked at the remaining employees who now watched him with respect and admiration. "You have the chance to make this dealership an example of respect and dignity," he said with a slight smile. "If we work together with those values, we can transform this place. Remember always, what defines someone is not what they own, but how they treat others." That day, George not only marked his presence as the dealership's owner, he left a profound message for those who stayed. A message that would resonate in every action from that moment on. From that day forward, Taylor's dealership wouldn't just be a place of sales, but a place where everyone, without exception, would be treated with the dignity they deserved. After the meeting, George sat in his new office, a spacious room decorated with modern furniture that contrasted with his simplicity. He took in each detail, trying to adapt to the new setting. Even though he was the owner, everything there still felt a bit strange to him. His life had been built in a small-town business, and now in that luxurious office, he felt somewhat out of place. But deep down, he knew he was there for a greater purpose. Minutes later, there was a light knock on the door. It was Michael, his son. He entered slowly, still processing what he had just witnessed. Discovering that his father had bought the dealership and dismissed some of the employees who had disrespected him left Michael in shock. George noticed the confused and hesitant look on his son's face and invited him in with a gentle nod. "Dad," Michael began, clearly unsettled. "I don't even know what to say. Why didn't you tell me about this sooner?" George looked at his son with a calm smile. "Michael, I wanted you to find things out naturally, without any expectations. I didn't want you to intervene or feel pressured. What happened here was something I needed to handle in my own way and with my own values." Michael nodded, though he still seemed troubled. "I understand, Dad, but I won't deny it was hard watching all of this from the sidelines. I felt torn between my responsibilities here and the respect I have for you." George sighed, understanding his son's dilemma. "Michael, I know you have responsibilities here, but sometimes you have to take a stand for what you believe in, no matter where you are. I remember everything I taught you about character and dignity. Those are values we should carry with us wherever we go." Michael lowered his eyes, ashamed. He knew his father was right. Since taking on the role of manager, he had let the competitive, elitist environment of the dealership influence his worldview. In that moment, he realized how far he had strayed from George's teachings. "Dad, I'm sorry," Michael said softly. "I should have done more. I should have recognized they were treating you poorly and taken a stand." George placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Michael, the lesson has been learned. And what matters now is that you have the chance to rethink what you truly value. I know you're a good man, and now is your opportunity to act on what you believe in. Let's transform this place together." The conversation between father and son was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was David, the lawyer, carrying a list of new processes and plans that George would need to review as the owner. David's proud expression showed how much he admired his friend and supported his decision. "It looks like things are already shaping up around here," David commented with a smile. "We already have a few ideas to improve customer service and the overall experience, George. We can discuss them whenever you're ready." George nodded, satisfied. He knew that with David's support and Michael's dedication, they could transform the dealership into a place that truly reflected the values he cherished. Over the following weeks, George dedicated himself to implementing a series of changes at the company. Instead of the cold and distant approach that had once dominated the environment, he encouraged training to help each employee understand the importance of treating everyone with dignity and empathy. The new customer service policy included best practices for welcoming clients and fostering a more respectful and collaborative workplace among employees. Additionally, George made a point to get to know each team member better. He wanted everyone to feel valued and understand that the company was not just a place to sell cars, but also a space where they could grow and develop. Employees began to realize they were working for a leader who genuinely cared about them and the customers. Gradually, the atmosphere changed, and a spirit of respect and harmony began to replace the old elitist and competitive behavior. Jack, one of the first to be dismissed, reached out to George sometime later. He sent a letter expressing regret for his actions and shared how the dismissal had made him deeply reflect on the importance of respect and humility. In the letter, Jack thanked George for the lesson, confessing that he had never considered the impact of his behavior on others. Reading the letter, George felt a mix of satisfaction and empathy. He held no resentment and understood that true justice wasn't about punishment but about learning. Jack seemed to have grasped the message, and for George, that was what truly mattered. Over time, Taylor Motors became known in town for its exceptional service. George's name began to attract the curiosity of customers, who quickly realized this dealership was not just a place to buy luxury cars, but also a space where people were treated with respect and dignity. For Michael, the transformation went even deeper. Working alongside his father helped him rediscover values he had almost lost in his rush to climb the career ladder. The experience with George taught him a different sense of responsibility, showing him how to balance ambition with respect and to value people over status. Michael became not only a more competent manager, but also someone capable of leading with humanity and integrity. One day, as George and Michael were chatting in the showroom, a customer walked in. He was a simple-looking older man about George's age, who glanced at the cars with a mix of curiosity and caution, revealing his uncertainty. George immediately approached him and offered a warm smile. "Can I help you with something, my friend?" he asked, extending his hand. The man, surprised by the kindness, smiled back. "I'm just looking around, son. Not sure I can afford anything here." George chuckled and placed a hand on the man's shoulder, recalling his own experiences. "Don't worry about that. Here, everyone's welcome. We'll find what's best for you, taking our time and with all the respect you deserve." Watching this scene, Michael felt an immense pride. He now understood the difference a simple gesture of respect could make. He saw in the customer's eyes the same gratitude he had once seen in his father's eyes. The cycle had come full circle. George had transformed the environment, impacting not only Michael's life but also the lives of everyone who walked into that dealership. George felt that, after a lifetime of work and dedication, he was leaving behind a legacy that went beyond business. He had planted a seed of respect that would continue to grow even after he was gone, and that's what allowed him to move forward with a light and peaceful heart. And so George, with his attitude of courage and dignity, transformed not only a dealership but also the lives of everyone around him, showing the value of respect above appearances. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt underestimated, or maybe witnessed someone being judged unfairly? How did you react? Share your experience in the comments. If you were moved by this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. We share inspiring stories almost every day, and you can click on one of the videos showing up on the screen to hear another incredible story. See you in the next video.